And as we just heard, Theresa May is promising a big crackdown on extremism, including on the internet. But how much power do governments actually have to curb the influence of online and social media?
JohnBlaxland from the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre at the Australian National University joins us now from Parliament House. JohnBlaxland, good morning and thank you for joining us. We'll start with exactly that question. We hear there Theresa May sounding strong and talking tough, but what influence can she exert over the internet?
Well, it's reasonably limited, unfortunately. We know, and the UK has as well, cyber security strategies. It has strategies for countering violent extremism, and they're reasonably well-developed ones. So those strategies are in place, and there's really a call for them to be boosted, if anything, but not drastically altered. The challenge, of course, is legal, and in terms of the freedoms of a state like the UK or Australia, which is very different to a country like China, which actually very strictly controls its internet, has firewalls and only allows apps to work that are approved by the state. Now, I don't get that we in Australia or even in the UK really have an appetite for that kind of control. But there may be some way along the spectrum there, some additional measures that can be applied to control particular access to websites. I know there's some work on this already. It's very hard to keep ahead of the game and on top of the diversity of sources that emerge. Yes. But there are things that can be done. And I think this is not about drastically changing course, but slowly ratcheting up the level of intensity in the cyber security space, as well as in the counter-violent extremism space.
Will it need, just to jump in there if I can, John, will it require some legislative change that then might become a politically difficult thing to achieve?
Look, I would be very cautious about going down that path. We've seen legislative proposals put up that have a political tinge to them, that are not necessarily ones that organisations like the Australian Cyber Security Centre or ASIO would necessarily want to see implemented. So if that were to happen, I would be looking very much to hear what Duncan Lewis has to say about that. And he may not want to go public on that, of course, because it may be something that where discretion is the better part of valour. And as we know, in this kind of business, you know, the secret of success is often in keeping your successes secret. So there's a degree of caution that needs to be applied when we're thinking about what to do, how to do it, what legislative changes we might want to implement, and be mindful of the potential knock-on consequences. We have a challenge here of a creative tension between civil liberties and the obligations of the state to protect us, protect us all. Managing that is very, very tricky. It's getting more and more tricky. It's interesting, though, the contrast between the UK and Australia is an important one for us here to note. We are very much in a stronger position than the UK. We have very robust architecture in terms of security and intelligence apparatus. We also have a much more supportive migrant community, particularly amongst the Muslim population, than I think is the case in the UK. So I would caution against those, and there are political voices out there, even this morning in the media, talking about, you know, bringing in more legislation, giving the army more teeth, and thinking, let's just hasten slowly on this, folks.
One can understand your desire to do that. However, it would seem that in the face of so many attacks now, and just focus on the UK for the moment here, that so-called soft power or you know, soft defence is not working. I mean, we have intelligence that's shared with the proper authorities. We have the hotline being used, and nonetheless, those people then go on to commit these murderous acts. Yeah,
no, we're not going to. The system's not perfect. You know, we're dealing with.
No one's after perfection, but I think people who ring a hotline might be after an outcome.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. I'm sure they'll be looking at what happened there, why that one slipped through the cracks, and what to do about it. And
what is that thing that can be done about it?
Well, maybe in this, I don't know the exact details of what actually transpired with that phone call, but maybe there may be the need for additional resources to actually respond to those calls. Let's not forget, the police and security forces in the UK are stretched. When you go around asking them how they're going, and there's tired looks on people's faces. Why? Because they've been at a very high state of alert for a long time. We are asking them to keep ratcheting up their capabilities, but what we are facing is a challenge that is beyond the realm realms of the police, it's beyond the realms of the intelligence agencies, and it's actually about society writ large. And this is something we need to bear in mind with effective countering of violent extremism. We actually need everybody to be engaged. So yes, it's about the cyberspace, but it's also about engagement in schools, with mosques, in churches, in local groups. We actually all have a role to play here. Calling that number, the emergency number, the hotline, absolutely. But that's not the only thing. If that's the only thing we're relying on, the system is threadbare. We actually need a whole spectrum of resources that are applied to this. Now, in Australia, we're pretty well placed for that. The UK, I think, is too. But of course, the scale of the challenge is so much larger.
John Blaxland, good to talk. We'll leave it there. Thank you.
My pleasure, Virginia.
We'll turn to some of the overseas reaction to the attack in London now.